November 1924. The Erie Railroad freight yards in Orange, New Jersey. The industrial soot hung low over the tracks, masking the cold, and he dropped from the boxcar just as the morning shift whistles finally blew. He had to move. The county vagrancy laws were strictly enforced, but the factory smoke provided adequate cover. He walked the perimeter of the sprawling manufacturing district. His notes detail exactly which alleys offered windbreaks. He was looking for temporary work, but found this. Let me tell you about New Jersey's industrial corridor in 1924 because you need to understand it before you can understand what he was walking into. It was a massive machine that consumed cheap labor and spat out American progress. He stood near the perimeter fence of a brick plant as the afternoon shift ended. He watched the workers spill out into the street. The young women walking past him were glowing faintly in the fading autumn twilight. But why? He had ridden 3 days in an open gondola car from Pennsylvania to get here. The cold had settled deep into his bones. He needed a hot meal, which cost 15 cents at the diner near the factory's main gates. He counted his coins under a flickering street lamp. 14 cents. He noted the precise deficit in the margins of his ledger. He stood across from the United States Radium Corporation, watching the glowing girls laugh as they boarded the streetcars. The pale glow wasn't a trick of the light. It clung to their hair, their dresses, their bare hands. He had seen phosphorus in the mining camps before, but this was different. He stayed in the shadows, observing their passing. He found shelter under a dilapidated loading dock a few blocks away. The temperature dropped steadily toward freezing. He wrapped himself in a discarded canvas tarp he found near the tracks. The road demanded endurance, and he gave it silently. The next morning, he watched the same women return to the factory. A local shopkeeper's record from that year noted the ghost girls walking to work. They painted watch dials for the military and the emerging consumer market. Every day. This is not the kind of thing that appears in official records. The county didn't document men like him. What we have is a notation in the margin of someone else's story, observing the exact moment an era poisoned itself. He learned their method from the idle talk at the rail yard. The women were instructed to point their brushes using their lips. Lip, dip, or paint. They were told the luminous paint was entirely harmless. He wrote down what they heard. The day's labor paid well for the women, nearly 3 times the average factory wage. He knew the cold math of desperation. He knew what a company would say to keep lines moving. He watched a young girl cough blood. His name does not appear in these notes, not once. Whether that was deliberate or whether the note simply never reached the pages where he wrote it, we don't know yet. If you want to be here when we find out, subscribe. The road continues. He left the loading dock and walked toward the town center. The radioactive dust was in the soil, the water, the air. He didn't know it was radium. He only knew the women looked exhausted under their strange, luminous skin. He swept a dirty storefront for a nickel and a bruised apple. The shop owner told him the girls were making excellent money, but he noticed the way the older workers limped. The notes mentioned the slow decay of jaws. Now, think about what that road looked like in November of that year. The chill of an approaching winter meant men like him had to keep moving south or find a furnace room. He chose the bitter warmth of observation. The U.S. Radium Corporation produced the paint under the trade name Undark. He recorded the name on a torn piece of ledger paper. He sat across the street, eating his apple, watching the daily deliveries arrive on heavy motorized trucks. He couldn't afford a room in the boarding houses where many of the girls lived. He slept out in the rail yard. The notes described the distant hum of the factory machinery running through the night, vibrating through the cold ground. By his 3rd day in Orange, the pattern was clear. The glowing women were young, mostly in their late teens. The road had taught him to recognize the look of people who were being slowly consumed by their own survival. He watched a foreman step out of the brick building, wiping his hands. The managers didn't glow. The scientists in the laboratories used lead screens and heavy tongs. He noted this stark separation of risk in the margins of his page. He walked past the local dentist's office on Main Street. The recorded accounts from 1924 showed young women arriving with mysteriously decaying jaws. He saw 2 girls entering, holding handkerchiefs to their faces in the cold. The town stayed silent. He found day labor unloading a coal car destined for the factory's furnaces. The work paid 50 cents a ton. He shoveled alongside men who spoke quietly about the glowing dust settling on the snow. No one asked questions. Let me tell you about the local economy in that valley, because it tells you everything about what he was actually choosing. The factory was the beating heart of Orange. To question the radium was to question survival. He earned enough for a cot in a crowded lodging house. The air smelled of unwashed wool and damp coal smoke. A county relief worker's log noted the transient population swelling as winter approached. He slept with his boots on. In the dark, he could hear a woman weeping in the alley below his window. The official records blamed the early deaths on syphilis, a convenient lie the company bought and paid for. He wrote down the sound of her cough. The next morning brought bitter sleet. He stood beneath the awning of the post office. The road out of town was turning to ice, but the factory lines never stopped. He watched the glowing women march into the brick complex. He needed moving money. He found an hour's work sweeping the loading dock where the radium crates sat. The heavy wooden boxes were stamped with warnings meant only for the handlers, not the painters. He felt the cold iron. The notes contain a sketch of a small paint pot. He observed how the powder caught the dim light. The girls licked their brushes to give them a fine point for the tiny watch dials. They swallowed the poison daily. He walked the rusted tracks behind the facility. A discarded rag coated in the luminous paint lay frozen in the mud. He didn't touch it. The road teaches you what to leave alone, even when you don't understand it. By 1924, the first of the dial painters had already died. The town knew, even if the state didn't. He watched a funeral procession move slowly down the icy street. The company men tipped their hats as the casket passed. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, a silent witness in a frayed coat. The headstones were pale in the overcast light. The road offered him no protection, but it didn't lie to him. The factory lied to everyone. He bought a stale loaf of bread with his remaining coins. The local grocer refused to look at the factory workers when they paid. Guilt hung heavy in the damp air. He chewed the dry bread, making his calculations. He spent his final night in Orange, huddled near the boiler vent of a closed textile mill. The ground was hard, but the steam kept the frostbite away. He listened to the distant freight trains pulling through the valley. The competing force was the approaching storm front. The documented weather records show a severe freeze locking down the New Jersey transit lines that week. He had to catch the Erie southbound before the tracks froze completely solid. He walked back toward the freight yards before dawn. The shift whistles shrieked through the freezing fog. The glowing women were already walking toward the gates. They looked like phantoms in the pale morning light. He hid behind a stack of rotting railroad ties, waiting for the southbound manifest. A railroad bull walked the line, swinging a heavy wooden club. Vagrancy meant 30 days in the county workhouse. He held his breath in the shadows. The U.S. Radium Corporation continued to deny the poison for years. The notes from 1924 capture the tragedy before the lawsuits, before the public outrage. He saw the truth before the courts ever demanded it. He saw the glowing bones. The freight train finally arrived, a massive iron beast cutting through the sleet. He timed his movement perfectly, running alongside a flat car and hauling himself up. The wood was slick with ice. The cold wind immediately tore at him. As the train pulled away, he looked back at the town of Orange. The factory smokestacks belched black soot into the gray sky. Below it, the invisible radium continued to eat through the jaws of the women left behind. Here is what everyone in that town knew and what nobody wrote down. The factory was a graveyard with a payroll. He pulled his collar up against the wind. The road ahead was brutal, but it was honest. He wrote his final entry for New Jersey on a shaking freight car. The handwriting is erratic, matching the violent motion of the train. He documented the cold, the cost of the bread, and the strange glowing dust. The dial painters eventually sued, a documented legal battle that changed American labor laws forever. But in 1924, they were just dying girls walking through the cold. He was a ghost watching ghosts. The train carried him further south. He crossed the state line as the freeze fully settled. The survival economics of the journey dictated his next move. He needed a town with a warm mission house or an unguarded barn. The radium faded from his immediate view, but the notes show he never forgot the luminous women. Years later, a stray mark in a ledger from a different state references the glowing hands of the factory girls. The road leaves scars that don't always heal. The U.S. radium facility was eventually demolished, leaving behind a heavily contaminated footprint. The earth itself remained poisoned for decades. He walked over that ground before anyone knew how deep the rot truly went. The women who painted the dials took the radium to their graves. Their bones still emit radiation today. The road took him away from the epicenter, but it couldn't erase what he had witnessed in the shadows of the factory. He rode the freight line through the night, being a silent passenger in a roaring iron box. The documented rail routes show he headed toward the coal towns of Appalachia. He traded one industrial machine for another. The movement never stopped. The historical record focuses on the triumph of the Radium Girls lawsuit, but the notes focus on the terrible silence of the town that let it happen. He understood the complicity of survival. Everyone looked the other way. The factory gates are gone now. The women are gone. What remains are the court documents and the lingering radiation, and somewhere buried in a stack of deteriorating paper are the observations of a man who saw it all firsthand. If this is the kind of historical storytelling you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. More roads, more cases, more of what the official record left out. And if you know this era, this region, or this kind of road, tell us in the comments what you know, what the records missed, what your family remembered that nobody wrote down. The people who lived this history are the reason anyone can reconstruct it. We want to hear from them. The last record that places him in orange is dated November 1924. After that, nothing. The case has been closed for a century. What he carried forward from New Jersey is not recorded. The road doesn't keep that kind of account.